This was not just another criminal case buried in the headlines, and James Mulvey was not just another name lost among countless convictions. For years, he existed in the background of a vast and carefully engineered international drug trafficking network, a system that moved silently across borders, blending so effectively into legitimate commerce that it remained hidden in plain sight. To most people, everything looked normal. Lorries transported goods across Europe, warehouses processed shipments without suspicion, and industrial equipment traveled through supply chains as it always had. But concealed within some of those shipments was a highly organized operation moving enormous quantities of cocaine and cannabis, eventually estimated to be worth up to £68 million. Mulvey, originally from Solihull in the UK, was later identified by investigators as a central figure within this network, someone who did not seek attention, rarely exposed himself to risk, and operated with a level of caution that made him incredibly difficult to detect. And like lower-level participants who handled physical transportation or distribution, Mulvey's role appeared to sit higher within the structure, where decisions were made, logistics were coordinated, and the overall flow of the operation was maintained across multiple countries. Between 2006 and 2007, the network relied on a method that was both ingenious and deceptively simple. Drugs were hidden inside hollow industrial metal rollers, large cylindrical components typically used in machinery, which were then shipped as part of legitimate freight consignments. These rollers did not attract suspicion because they were genuine industrial items, making them an ideal concealment method. The shipments traveled through established commercial routes, passing through locations such as Worcestershire, before continuing on to Ireland, all under the appearance of routine business activity. Each successful delivery reinforced the illusion of safety, strengthening confidence within the network and allowing the operation to continue expanding. Investigators would later estimate that at least 15 separate shipments were carried out, each one contributing to the massive total value of the drugs involved. For a time, the system worked almost perfectly. There were no obvious signs, no immediate red flags, and no direct links pointing to those orchestrating the operation behind the scenes. But as is often the case in complex investigations, it was not a major breakthrough or advanced surveillance technology that first exposed the operation. Instead, it was a small observation made by someone going about their everyday job. A warehouse worker in Belgium noticed something unusual, a pattern that didn't quite make sense. The same industrial rollers appeared to be returning repeatedly, which was not typical for normal commercial use. It was a subtle inconsistency, easy to overlook, but significant enough to raise suspicion. That moment would prove to be the beginning of the end. Authorities were alerted, and inspections were carried out. When the rollers were examined more closely, the hidden contents were revealed: large quantities of cocaine and cannabis, along with cutting agents used to increase volume and profit. This discovery immediately transformed what had seemed like routine logistics into a major criminal investigation. From that point forward, multiple law enforcement agencies across different countries began working together, sharing intelligence and coordinating efforts in an attempt to uncover the full extent of the network. As the investigation progressed, the scale of the operation became clearer. This was not a small group or a single shipment gone wrong, but a structured and organized system designed to operate over time with minimal risk. Several individuals connected to the network were identified, arrested, and later convicted. Their roles varied, from handling transportation to facilitating logistics, but together they formed part of a larger structure that depended on coordination and secrecy. Yet even as arrests were made and evidence gathered, one key figure remained out of reach. As the pressure intensified, Mulvey disappeared. In 2007, just as authorities were closing in on others involved in the case, he fled the UK, effectively vanishing from view. What followed was nearly a decade of evasion, during which he adopted a lifestyle specifically designed to avoid detection. He avoided anything that could create a traceable record, rarely using bank accounts, relying heavily on cash transactions, and frequently changing mobile phones to prevent tracking. He moved between locations, often staying in hotels rather than establishing a permanent residence, making it difficult for investigators to predict his movements or establish patterns. This approach made him incredibly hard to locate, and for years, it appeared as though he had successfully escaped. To some, it may have seemed like the case had reached a dead end, that he had outmaneuvered the system and disappeared for good. But behind the scenes, the investigation continued. Law enforcement agencies do not simply abandon cases of this scale, especially when significant evidence already exists. Instead, they continue to build their case, analyzing financial records, reviewing past communications, and following any lead that could provide new insight. Investigations like this are not about speed, they are about persistence. Every piece of information, no matter how small, can contribute to a larger picture. Years passed, but the case remained active, slowly evolving as new evidence emerged. Then, in 2014, a significant development occurred. Mulvey was recorded in conversation, and investigators believed that what he said linked him back to the earlier drug trafficking conspiracy. It was not a dramatic moment, not a confession or a clear admission, but it was enough to strengthen the case, adding another layer to the already substantial body of evidence. From that point on, the focus intensified. Authorities continued to track his movements, working across borders and coordinating efforts with international partners. Finally, in 2017, after years of searching, they located him in Lithuania, where he had been living with his girlfriend. His arrest marked the end of nearly 10 years on the run. Armed officers carried out the operation, taking him into custody before he was extradited back to the UK to face trial. The proceedings at Birmingham Crown Court lasted approximately 10 weeks, reflecting the complexity and scale of the case. Prosecutors presented detailed evidence, outlining how the operation had functioned, how drugs were concealed and transported, and how the network had managed to operate undetected for so long. They described Mulvey as a central figure within the organization, someone whose role was critical to its success. The court also heard about the financial side of the operation, including the large sums of money involved in the lifestyle associated with it. Reports suggested connections to luxury living, including property in places like Marbella, highlighting the contrast between the hidden nature of the crimes and the visible rewards they generated. Ultimately, the jury found him guilty of multiple counts of conspiracy to import cocaine and cannabis. In 2018, he was sentenced to 32 years in prison, a sentence that reflected both the scale of the operation and his role within it, and one of the most significant penalties handed down for this type of offense in the UK. The story of James Mulvey is not just about one individual, but about the nature of modern organized crime. It shows how criminal networks can operate across borders, using legitimate systems as cover, and how they can remain hidden for years through careful planning and discipline. It also highlights the role of chance and observation, how something as simple as a warehouse worker noticing an unusual pattern can trigger an investigation that ultimately dismantles an entire network, and perhaps most importantly, it demonstrates the persistence of law enforcement, the willingness to continue pursuing a case over many years, even when the main suspect has disappeared. In the end, what once appeared to be an untouchable operation was gradually exposed, piece by piece, until there was nowhere left to hide. And it leaves behind a final question, one that applies not just to this case but to many others like it. In a world where both criminal networks and investigators are constantly evolving, is it ever really possible to stay hidden forever? Or is it only a matter of time before even the most carefully constructed systems begin to unravel?